Welcome to Diplomatic Passport here on Zim Papers Television Network, the daily weekday COVID-19 show that keeps you up to date with developments the world over, in our region and of course in Zimbabwe. My name is Robert Mkundiwa. Today we'll start by taking a look at Zimbabwe's COVID-19 cases as of the latest data released by the Ministry of Health and Childcare. So Zimbabwe now has 5,643 confirmed cases, including 4,442 recoveries and 150 deaths. Now, 265 new cases of COVID-19 were recorded just yesterday, and these are 254 local transmission cases and 11 returnees from South Africa. 9 deaths have been reported in the last 24 hours. Now, of these, 6 are from Harare, 1 from Masvingo, 1 from Mashonaland West, and the other one is from Mash Central. Harare, of course, is still the epicenter with 2,270 cases, followed by Bulawayo, which has 1,218 cases of COVID-19. Now, we've been talking about COVID-19 for more than half the year now, and it must have really wreaked havoc on things that were absolutely planned. The effect of COVID-19 pandemic has had far-reaching implications for the education sector, no less. School closures have been disrupted that flow of education for more than 4.6 million Zimbabwean children. Now, the government of Zimbabwe deferred reopening of schools following a spike in COVID-19 cases. The reopening of schools has been postponed from 28 July 2020 to a later date that is yet to be advised. Now, to help me delve deep into these issues with regards to education, I'm joined by a very reputable journalist that we have, one of our own, Leroy Dzenga. Leroy, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Leroy, you've been working a lot within the education sector with regards your writings, and of course you interact a lot at that level. How badly do you think this catastrophe has affected our school children?
Well, I think the crisis itself has birthed another crisis within the education sector, because when you look at it, there's a lot of planning that goes into every term in terms of curriculum, resources, and even the logistics themselves. So when we tried to open and then we failed to open, we incurred a very huge cost. We might not be able to get into the numbers now, but when we look back, we're going to look at the numbers that we lost in terms of trying to bring together resources. For instance, University Vice Chancellors donated 10,000 liters of sanitizers in preparation for reopening. Now imagine all the other resources that were mobilized that never got to be used. Say stationery, for instance. There's some stationery that is term specific that would need to be reprinted should there be need to use it later. So we are looking at this from resource cost. You would see that this term that was aborted before just opening was a huge cost to people in terms of resources. And then there's the psychology of it. You know, the teachers themselves, they have to prepare themselves to go back to work, and then they're told, no, you're no longer going back to work. The students, the learners, they are thinking, am I still going to write this year? The lack of clarity that is there has a burden on learners because they don't know if they should rest or if they should continue reading and studying.
Well, that's the thing, because we're trying somewhat to force the term to happen, to force the education year to happen, but it has a serious mental strain on the young students we have who are really waiting to write, and there's a lot of this deferring. What do you think the government should do? We've seen other governments declare 2020 non-existent and virtually just say, you know what, this is not going to happen this year. Let's create something conducive for next year. But we still seem to want to push things and say it's going to happen. What's your advice to government with regards to that issue?
Well, if it were my call to make, I would say let us use the downtime, because COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon if the science that is being communicated is anything to go by. So let us use the downtime between this year and next year so that we can create materials for those that do not have internet access, rural students in rural areas, learners in rural areas. We should create content that can be delivered to them once a week physically. So we can use the downtime to do that. Also, the creation of our radio content has to be more comprehensive and engaging. Of course, we have radio content now, but it is not as nuanced as you would want learner content to be. So let's use the downtime to be meticulous in our preparation so that when we then have to reopen, even in the worst case scenario, schools can still continue. Even the online learning itself, we should create models where people can have data, institutions can have data. We can even utilize these community ICT centers to help vulnerable learners. So these are things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to expedite the building of community ICT centers, also to increase the recruitment of teachers, because as it stands, classes are going to be broken down into
they'll have to be
smaller groups. And now teachers are not enough, if what teachers unions have been claiming is true. So we need to use these 4 months, these 5 months, to put our house in order so that we can, when we reopen, even in the presence of COVID-19, we can have an efficient system that's flowing. So I would rather we forfeit this year, we plan, we put resources together, and then we restart next year. But we don't restart from the first term. We just restart from where the people left. Yeah.
You know Takawafira Joe, he's had his own views on when schools should open, and he's actually spoke to us, and let's see what Takawafira Joe said before we further discuss that with regards to the education sector here in Zimbabwe.
Our proposal was to the fact that it's possible even to open in October, learn in October in November up to mid-December, continue to learn in January, and from mid-February, we write examinations up to the end of March. And then for next year, instead of having 3 terms, we would have 2 terms, so that we can open in April, learn April, May, June, and close at the end of July.
Well, that's what Takawafira Joe is suggesting there, that we open, of course, in October. So that's another view coming from somebody else. But talking about perpetuity, you also are somebody immersed in academia and academics. What sort of mental strain does it put on a pupil or a student, knowing that they're preparing for an exam and have the date? And how worse is it when you absolutely don't know whether you are writing or not, or when you're writing, or if at all?
Okay. The danger that's there in terms of our learners is that the uncertainty itself wears on their ability to interact with content. It's like when your faculties are not calm, you then cannot really be said you are objectively studying for an exam. It's actually difficult for you to even grasp the concepts because your mind is occupied with another unanswered question. But what you need to do as an individual is to maybe try, parents have been trying, but albeit illegally, to send their children to extra lessons, which creates another risk because parents are saying we cannot let our children sit because we don't know when the exams will be written. Maybe people may come out and say, the exams will be written tomorrow and our children have to be prepared. But as they do that, they're creating another problem in the sense that sending children to unregulated extra lessons is a health risk on its own. And the suggestion that schools have to reopen in October, unfortunately, is not premised on science, because the science is saying there's no correlation between hot weather and low infection. The United Kingdom is in summer, but their numbers are rising. So we cannot say that October cases will be under control. We just have to open when our local cases are no longer increasing. When we now, let's say this week we record 100 cases, next week we record 40, with consistent testing. That's when we can then extrapolate an opinion that we should reopen. But assuming that hot weather is a correlation to low numbers is, in a way, being reckless. But I would understand why he's suggesting that. Teachers have been sitting for long. And remember, this is a new curriculum. So the predicament is that teachers are learning while the learners themselves are learning, which creates a double-barreled crisis. Because the more the teachers are out of touch with the content they're teaching, they are going to want to learn themselves before they can teach.
Absolutely.
So this is why teachers would not want to sit for the rest of the year. So it's something that our reasoning has to be balanced. We need to have a multifaceted discussion and then look at the elements that can feed into a collective decision.
Well, to those who are just joining us, this is the program that you are watching. Yes, indeed. You are tuned to Zim Papers Television Network, and this is Diplomatic Passport, where today we're talking about the education sector in the country with Leroy Dzenga, and we're trying to at least come up with, there's no model really which we can look at. You talked about the United Kingdom, and interestingly, I've got this because the United Kingdom was also struggling about, you know, whether they'll reopen and when they'll reopen and that sort of thing. And yesterday, somebody announces that the government have U-turned. A-levels will now be based on center-assessed grades. Now, Dr. Rosena Allen Khan is bemoaning the fact that, well, just think of the untold damage this has done on pupils' mental health, thousands of avoidable spikes in anxiety and depression because the education secretary was too stubborn to admit fault. Now, this is very important, the fact that there's anxiety and depression that's been put into this. We don't seem to value that, to value the fact that our children will be anxious, our children will be depressed. We're not really looking at that, and it seems a lot of people were suggesting that we will start and we won't know when, are not taking that into cognizance.
Yes, that's true. I think we need to be objective. This pandemic started in March, which means learners had maybe 20 or so days of learning. And this gap cannot be accounted for as a learning period because no one has the truth about what's been happening in various homes. So what it means is that essentially our learners this year had very little interaction with content in a structured environment. So for us then to be expedient and then say they can write, it's not really, because an exam really has to be a reflection of understanding. We should not just make people write exams for, for fulfillment of schedule.
Exams for exams' sake.
Yeah, but what I think can be done is to say primary school exams, grade 7, are not really the most critical of exams. So they can be done in the way that other countries have tried to do it, to say they'll be handled at a school level. I mean, if we reopen, we may have to suspend national exams at grade 7 level, and then they're done at a school level, so that we lessen the burden, the logistic burden. And then what we can do is we can then expedite the primary schools term, so that we free up the infrastructure that is in primary schools for high schools now to occupy part of that infrastructure, because
be educationally distanced, as it were.
So we are looking at maybe in the CBD, for example, you have Selborne Routledge, close to Prince Edward. If we move fast and then we try to expedite the terms, it means that some learners from Prince Edward may have to occupy infrastructure at Selborne Routledge. It's a cheaper method instead of increasing classroom blocks, because the danger that there is, you reopen, the virus itself is very infectious, as we know. And if you reopen without taking into cognizance these issues that learners come from, we might actually see a school-inspired spike.
Yeah.
So we need to be careful. We may have to use a more radical approach in our thinking as we reconfigure education.
And perhaps before we wrap this up, what does, if we were to write, say we are to write, and you're an employer, and then you look back and somebody tosses their CV your way, and it happens to be a class of 2020 with all this madness, and the children will have written, the pupils will have written. Don't you think that will have an impact on how employers look at people educated in this time of turmoil and think this is not exactly the best result or the best year to actually assess people, and that will that not even prejudice people who will have written in 2020 in the eyes of potential future employers?
Well, I don't think it's an issue with employers, because the normal transition is that when you're done with your high school, you then have to move to tertiary level. So for these that are in high school and primary school, I think they are cushioned by the next level that they have to reach out to. But if it's for tertiary level now, we have to take a competence-based approach. Instead of writing dissertations, I think we may have to revert to a process where you create a product that shows your competence. So if you're studying film, and then you graduate with a film on your hands, it's a better way than to graduate with an academic document as a dissertation. So we need to rethink the way we assess. If people are studying engineering, I'd rather they come out with models that actually work than arguments for certain theories. So we need to, I mean, it's a good thing that the policy framework is there. We have Education 5.0, which is already an idea that pushes proactive reasoning in our institutions. So what we can do is, I mean, you're a journalist, you're studying to be a journalist. I mean, if you graduate with a documentary, you can then go to a prospective employer and say, this is my competence. It's different from arguing on the merits and demerits of a certain aspect. So I think even our examination in the next 2 to 3 years, remember this is not just 1 year that has been affected. Even if COVID is to go away, the next 2 to 3 years will not be an easy 2 to 3 years, because we have to plug in all these gaps that are coming through. There's a trickle-down effect that might actually have 5 years to clear off. So we need to be calm about it and to be creative in our assessment.
Well, Leroy, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for those insights. And of course, I believe going forward, we really would want to further assess what's happening in the education sector and other industries, of course, because as a journalist, you're on the ground, you're interacting with various arms of our society, to find out from you, of course, how we can best make our way forward with regards to this very unique year, for want of a better word. So that's all from me today here at Diplomatic Passport, but keep your contributions coming to my Twitter handle at Zimrobie, that's ZIMROBBIE, or my email address, robinkondiwa@gmail.com. So from me and the whole team here at Diplomatic Passport, I stamp the passport until tomorrow.